I think multimedia, I think print, television, radio. And then I began realizing, and I started taking the magazine pieces that I was writing and turning them into television pieces. It wasn't just like that, but it took time, and I knew people in television. I'm sure all of you at some point are going to know people in other mediums. And the main point I would like to make about that is that you, whatever field you are in now, if you approach a story knowing that you're going to do it in different mediums at the same time, you'll actually approach your reporting a little differently, because you're going to be collecting, you're going to be taking your notes copiously with your notebook, but you're also going to have a good radio, and you're going to get the interviews you need, but also you're going to figure out how to get sound so you can illustrate a story. And obviously the same thing applies to television. So I would encourage people to begin thinking that if you can do a good journalistic inquiry, you can pull it off in at least one other medium, and you begin to master what that medium is. And I think that is truly where the future lies.
He was saying that a lot of soldiers would approach their missions with the tactic of getting everybody out alive, but just keeping Americans alive is not going to implement democracy in Iraq, which is the ultimate goal. He also talked about the military-industrial complex and media coverage, which obviously we could debate this point, but Kevin essentially felt that a lot of what he was seeing and reading about the Iraq War was superficial, and it was, reporting on isolated incidents, or sort of doesn't it suck to be in Iraq stories, pardon my language. And he felt he wasn't really seeing a lot about sort of the interconnectedness and how things were working together. So I really wanted to do a project that looked at all these different parts and how they were integrated.
I was lucky enough to be able to find somebody who took me as close to Iraq as I could possibly go without actually going there. I found through a web of random connections Bassam Rida, who is a special advisor to Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. And he is an Iraqi-born, escaped from Iraq when he was 18 or 19, moved to the United States, became an avid opponent of Saddam Hussein, since most of his family and friends were killed by him. And finally made it to Los Angeles, where he established, the American dream, as anybody would put it. 2 kids, a beautiful wife, beautiful house, his own inspection company. And so all of that changed, though, in 2003 when Saddam was ousted, and he wanted to go back. And originally I wanted to approach the project with talking to people from the State Department who were also, could tell me on the ground what was happening in Iraq, but that proved to be really problematic with the non-disclosure agreements. So I had to go a different route, and luckily found him who didn't have any of those kind of agreements, and who could talk to me really freely about his perspective of what was going on there as an Iraqi, but also as an American, and what he thought about everything that was happening, and what he also did as well in the administration. So he's had some really interesting roles. Probably the most interesting is that he was the head of the execution process in Iraq. After the botched executions of Saddam Hussein and Chemical Ali, he came in and streamlined the process, also earning him the name as Hangman of Iraq, and a variety of other epithets that he gets very defensive about. But he also has done a variety of other things in the administration. He helped administer the elections in Southern California as well, when that all happened. So he's been a very active part of the Iraqi community, both in America and in Baghdad. So it was interesting to hear his perspective on just what the Americans are doing. And really what he says is that Iraqis have to do it. And there's no way that we can bring democracy to Iraq. It's the democracies have to work for democracy in their own country. So it was just a really eye-opening experience. I met with him several times, met his whole family, interviewed him for hours on end, and really I felt like I got an inside perspective on what the perspective is.
Yeah, I spent several weeks trying to make contact with this imam who had no interest in speaking to me, and it just took a lot of persistence, but eventually was able to meet with him, and have subsequently met with him about 6 times, and he's really opened up about his perspective. But it's important sort of to note, in 1991, when his family came over, when his father first came over to the U.S., His father came, and there wasn't much of a Muslim community established here in the U.S., and the dad decided that this was sort of the land of opportunity, and he brought his 5 sons over, and they now run 5 of the most important mosques in the U.S. They run the Dearborn Mosque, largest in the U.S., the Orange County Mosque, the Fresno Mosque, and the San Diego Mosque. The father, as you'll see, you may or may not see in the piece, and how far we can get. The father, 3 days after U.S. forces took over Baghdad, he went to the LA airport and called his family from LAX and said, I'm going home. My people need me, and this is my opportunity to go back and help in Iraq. And he flew into Damascus, took the dry border over, and he ended up selling his house here, probably about a $1.7 million house, I suspect, in the hills. These people do well. And sold the house and has built an orphanage, a school, and a 6-story hospital in Iraq. This gentleman right here, Imam Kaswini, went back 3 weeks after his father on a C-130 Hercules military cargo flight. His family had been meeting with Bush in advance of the invasion of Los Angeles. We had an opportunity to do, or the police department had started to do a Muslim mapping project because Muslims can't be located by the census data. They tried to do this project, which of course made a huge stink. But the other big gripe after terminating the Muslim mapping project was the harassment they receive at the airports every time they come back. But Homeland Security has visited the Kaswinis half dozen times. He's on the watch list, and it doesn't sort of ever seem to end, despite the fact that he has had repeated meetings with them. They've promised to take him off the list. They recognize that what he's doing in Iraq is actually very positive. They've got, you don't see the photos there, but they're built, they're educating children. They've got the schools are all integrated, boys and girls, and they're doing sort of both a religious and a secular kind of programming. But the call's going to continue, and C.I.R has recently sort of been added to another blacklist for no apparent reason at all, and this is post-Obama. So.
Sandy, Mark, and Rosie, they kind of helped me make it kind of focus more on the psychology behind it and some of the studies and demographics that inform these campaigns. So I spoke with the Army, I spoke with an advertising firm, and I spoke with a representative of McCann Erickson, who is running this program, this $1.35 billion advertising campaign, which will run until 2011. It's double what the U.S. military has spent on advertising since 2005. So it's an incredible increase, especially now in a recession.
Basically, I was walking down the street one day in Hollywood, and a couple of recruiters walked by, and they told me that they were, one thing led to another. I went to visit them at the recruiting center, and they said that they were having some problems recruiting. That one of the issues was that a lot of the people who were contacting them weren't qualified because they didn't have legal status.
It was definitely inspiring to see some of my fellow students, people I knew who were putting these things together, and I actually had no idea that all this was going on, so, and definitely as we're moving into the digital age, there's going to be more of this type of thing, multimedia journalism that people are going to be doing, and that need to be trained in doing, so it's good to see that we've got some fellow students who are on the ground running right now doing this type of thing.